What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the brand new COASTER-net Uncut. It is officially 2020, and we are here with the complete redesign of, not complete redesign, I promise a few new graphics, a few new colors. We're bringing back the old classic uncut red. Danny, it is now 2020. It's the new year.
But no new hosts.
No new hosts, though. No new hosts. Still the same old assholes here on COASTER-net Uncut.
Asshole from Chicago.
Don't forget about the asshole from Green, New York, either.
No, that's right.
Binghamton. But we've got a great show for you here tonight to kick off the new year. We're going to finish up Danny's discussion of the European parks, and this time we're actually going to finish one that sounds a little bit of interesting here, a little bit of a little bit of the good news, a little bit of the great parks, the one that kind of blew you away, if you will.
Yeah.
So Danny, we are going to talk about Efteling. Now, on paper, this might seem like a strange decision. If you go to RCDB and you look at the roller coaster list, you may be a little bit confused based on what's going on here. Baron 1898, Joris and Python, and that pretty much kind of rounds out things that are interesting for roller coasters. So obviously there's going to be something else here to talk about. So why don't you tell us why Efteling is what you say the best park in Europe?
Yeah, and it was certainly my favorite day, and was our day. We talked about this on the Phantasialand show and also the Europa Park show. Those two parks were hyped up to be great, and they were great. They were everything that I expected and more, everything that I wanted and more. Efteling was the park that had the potential to be the big sleeper hit, right? And it absolutely was. And I think the reason that I come away from the entire trip saying Efteling was my park of the trip may have to do with some of those expectations, right? And I wasn't disappointed by Phantasialand or Europa Park. I'm not trying to imply that at all. I was just so blown away, and my expectations were so vastly exceeded at Efteling that it was just an experience that I will never forget. So what more than a full day at Efteling. So we actually, the first day where we did Movie Park Germany and then Olympia Looping was on a Saturday. And Efteling was open until 11 p.m. that night. And we were staying at the Efteling Hotel, which is right outside the park fences. This is a very large park and an expansive park. A lot of the rides are very spread out. Most of the roller coasters, with the exception of Bob, which was their Intamin bobsled coaster, the other coasters are sort of all in the very back of the park, which is near where the hotel entrance is. So the hotel entrance is actually kind of close to the coasters. And then Bob was kind of sort of in the middle of the park near Symbolica, which is closer to the front of the park and the front entrance. Now, Bob has since been removed. It actually was removed at the end of the month, a few weeks after we left, and is being replaced by twin family Gerschlauer coasters, sort of like a Fire Chaser Express type deal, called Max and Moritz. Or they Mach. Oh, they're Mach, sorry. Not Gerschlauer. They're Mach rides, Max and Moritz. But they're slow, a family, only 22 mile an hour, twin onboard sound, sort of a family racing type coaster if you look at the rendering. So anyways, let's jump into Efteling. So we actually got to spend about 3.5 hours on Saturday evening at the park. So our first ride was Baron 1898, or if you say, I'm going to have a shout out to Adam Beard, who I've mentioned, throughout some of these shows here, because he was on the first week with Sue and our friend Chris Brucker. That were going on the coaster crew part of the trip also joined us for some of those other parks and Adam was along for most of that as well. He actually went to Efteling back in the spring of 2019. During his spring break week, he took 4 or 5 days and went over to Paris and went to Disneyland. And he also went to the Netherlands and he spent a day at Efteling. So we actually had the benefit of him sort of knowing the park already, which was very, very useful, that we had sort of a veteran of sorts with us because he was able to navigate the park. So he was really sort of leading the way at this park. So our first ride was Baron 1898, or as they say in Dutch, Baron 1898 is how that's pronounced. And one of the fun things here, and I mentioned this with Walibi Holland, was all of the employees spoke very good English and also Dutch, obviously some of them French or German. Efteling is a little bit closer to the German border, so you hear German a little bit more and a little bit less English. But most employees spoke English and Dutch for sure, and a lot of them spoke German. But none of the signage is in English at this park, and none of the pre-shows and none of the dialogue is in English for the most part. So a lot of the rides that have pre-shows are always in Dutch. Some of them are in German as well. And then a handful of them might do 1 or 2 phrases in English or French. But I can count on one hand how many times a ride was speaking English. So it was... And the biggest compliment I can give to this park right off the bat is I didn't feel like I felt like I understood what was going on in the shows and in the ride buildings. Like, I got the sense of what was supposed to be happening, even though I don't speak Dutch. So the ride experiences themselves were good enough to tell the story. Like, I understood what was supposed to be happening. And Dutch in itself is a very weird language because it almost sounds fake. It almost sounds like it's a fairy tale made up language, the way that they spell things even. I mean, look at the name of the town that Efteling is in is Kaatsheuvel, which is Kaatsheuvel, Kaatsheuvel. It just looks weird. A lot of their city names and street names have the IJK at the end, which is like X at the end. It's really, really strange. There's just so many things like Baron, like, it doesn't sound real. Like, you couldn't make that up, right? And it's all part of the Efteling experience, I think. So it was a lot of fun having that sort of experience at a park that was just so grand as Efteling. Now let's also say this. Efteling itself, I think if I read this correctly, is actually owned by the Dutch government, like a big Dutch government it's like their nature conservation division or whatever. So it gets government funding and it gets like environmental conservation funding. So it's a very green park. If you're over by Symbolica or Fata Morgana, you can't see Baron or Joris and the Draak. And when you're in the back part of the park where Joris and the Draak and Vlaj and Baron 1998 are, you can't see Symbolica, and you can't see the building that Droomvlucht is in, and you can't see the Ravelin theater. It really sort of helps you suspend disbelief that you're in a theme park and see other themed areas. Like when you're at Universal, you can be in Marvel Superhero Island and look across the pond and see the Harry Potter castle. There's none of that going on here. So that's one thing. But the other thing is Efteling is not a park that has 5 or 6 themed areas. It's one cohesive theme throughout the entire park. And I'm not even sure what you would describe it as it's fantasy, I think is sort of the, fantasy, I think is the best way you could describe it. It's like a mix of fairy tales and magic and things like that, because I alluded to this when we talked about it at Europa Park. They have a huge forest in the middle of the park that is their fairy tale forest, where you can go to the Little Red Riding Hood house. You can go see the Tale of George and the Dragon, which is the inspiration, which is literally what Joris and the Drac means, which is their GCI racing wood coaster. You can go into the Pinocchio house. You can go into the Snow White house and the Seven Dwarfs. All of those classic fairy tale stories are in the fairy tale forest. And there's signage in Dutch and some in English of telling you the story. And there's animatronics there sort of acting out the story. And one of the reasons that Efteling has won a lot of awards for not only theme parks in general, but Efteling has been highly regarded as a children's park historically by many publications and different awards that are given out, because they have so many family-friendly and kid-friendly rides. And the fairy tales, my favorite part of the fairy tale forest is there is a statue of a donkey, and the donkey's up on the statue, and there's a coin slot in like the base of the statue, right? And you can put like a 5 euro cent coin or whatever it is, however much it is, into the coin slot, and the donkey's tail lifts up and it literally shits out a silver coin, like a commemorative silver coin, onto the midway. And we stood there and watched this for like 5 minutes, just little kids running up and putting coins and watching the donkey just fire silver coins out of its ass, literally. Like where else but Europe?
Yeah, where else are you going to find that?
So that was a lot of fun, and just one of those weird things, right, that you would just never see in the States. They don't see, and people and kids in particular are just fascinated by this, of course, and they're laughing and having a good time. So we did take some time to experience that, because that is one of the sort of the trademarks of the Efteling experience, is going through the fairy tale forest. Oh, and for Rob Dole and yourself, the Little Mermaid, topless Little Mermaid in the fairy tale forest at Efteling.
What more do you want?
More boobs. So again, another that's 3 parks now, Andy. That you've got like very, very purposeful buxom boobage over there.
It is January 1st, and they are changing all the rules on YouTube. So I think we have to add more of this into our shows. So we're not
might have to.
I don't want to be classified as a kids show here. So, if we're going to talk about boobs, I don't think there'll be any complaints from one Rob Dole or from you or from me. Brian Bass might have an issue with it, though. You know how he
Well, that's fine. He can complain about whatever he wants. 2 more things that I want to talk about the park as a whole before we get into the individual attractions. The trash cans, okay?
Now, wait a minute. This is straight out of the Dick Kinzel playbook here. Is when Dick Kinzel would go to a park, he looked at the trash cans first to try. He was all about trash cans. He loved trash can technology, how trash cans are laid out. So now I'm interested all of a sudden.
Okay, so if you go to RCDB and you're on the Efteling, like the park homepage, and you're looking at the park photos, photo number 2 is one of these trash cans. Okay? And it's this fat chubby guy with his mouth wide open. You see this?
Mm-hmm.
So, and you see the guy on top of the building, like pointing down at him. So there are tons of these trash cans throughout the entire park that look exactly like this. And I mean, they're different characters or whatever. They're not exactly this guy, but there's male, there's female, there's, all sorts of different costumes that they're in, but they're all saying, papier here, like there's a speaker going, papier here, which is paper here, right? And when you hold your paper and your trash up to the mouth, it sucks it in.
What?
This park is immaculately clean. And it's somehow it makes it fun to throw away your trash.
Yeah.
It makes people want to throw away their trash. It's brilliant. And that's why the park is gorgeous and it's spotless, even though it's absolutely massive. And you see very few employees just walking around just sweeping up. But it's immaculate because it makes fun for kids and adults to throw their trash out. So it was like every time we had a pretzel or, you know, something to eat or whatever, and we had a napkin and our trash, we'd take it over to one of the talking trash cans and threw our trash away. It was great. And then let's move to photo number 6. And this is a picture of what it looks like at night. This is the House of the Five Senses, which is the main entrance of the park. And this is a park entrance that people have always talked about as being one of the great theme park entrances of the world. And it got a lot of votes when it was part of the Ride War Choice Awards a few years ago. And I looked at pictures of it and I said, well, that's unique, that's different, that's cool. But, you know, why does that get so much attention? Why does that get so much praise? Well, having been there now, I completely get it. And I have to agree, it is one of the most awe-inspiring park entrances that I've ever seen. So if you're looking at photo 6 and that's what it kind of looks like lit up at night. Again, it's called the House of the Five Senses. So the outside and the steeple-looking structure and the points are all shingles, right? Like they're very precisely shaped shingles. And then you can see it a little bit with the lighting here, but the entire underside is all wood, post, and beam. And it's all curved wood. Like there is not a single flat, straight piece of wood or lumber anywhere in this. And the entire superstructure of it, underneath all 3 of those big points, are single wooden posts that go up, or like a set of small wooden posts, and then they all flare out to support the underside of the roof. So if you follow me on Facebook or Instagram, I posted I don't know how many pictures of this thing when we were standing underneath it. But I mean, if I take my webcam here and sort of look at my walls around, you know, my house up here and how it's wood, post, and beam, like that, this is like standard wood, post, and beam.
Yeah.
Like it's just straight, it's flat walls and then just beams going across, because my house used to be a barn, and then it was converted to a permanent dwelling. This is all curves and flowing curves, and then seemingly rounded custom wooden posts and beams going out to support the roof. From an architecture and an engineering standpoint, it is certainly a marvel. And the pictures don't do it justice, and they don't show how big this actually is. I mean, I don't know exactly what the and maybe Wikipedia will tell me this. I don't even know. The House of the Five Senses, the entrance to Efteling. I don't know if it tells me exactly how tall it is, but it's got to be close to 150 feet tall. It's huge. And it makes sense because I'm looking at the park here is roughly 500 acres. So it's quite a large park in terms of area as well. So those are some of the things just from a park experience standpoint, from a park standpoint, that already make this park great before we even get into any of the attractions. So without further ado, shall we start talking about the attractions? Yeah.
People go to parks not for entrances, Danny.
Yes, that's true.
For rides.
This is true. So let's talk about the rides. And this is, and I talked about this with Europa Park the other day, is Europa Park has 13 roller coasters. They've got 3 or 4 that are very, very good, 1 or 2 that are real standouts. They've got a solid supporting cast, and then they've got, 8 to 10 dark rides that are all good to very good. And a lot of people said that the Pirates in Batavia ride was sort of their real standout dark ride, and perhaps when it reopens, it will return to that for sure. and they're always building new stuff and doing new stuff. And I would say that maybe Arthur is supposed to be their standout dark ride, even though it's technically a coaster as well. Efteling, on the other hand, has no less than 5 outstanding, top of the line, some of the best in the world dark rides, in my opinion. At least they're the ones that I've ridden. Certainly, and that's not to say that all of them, that all 5 of them would be the best dark ride at Europa Park. I'm not necessarily going that far, but certainly at least 2 of them would. And maybe a third. So I'm going to, again, give the folks the chance to follow along with the order we're going in. We're going to go through the Wikipedia order here because it makes sense. If you go to the attractions and rides in Efteling in their designers section, they go in chronological order from their construction. So we're going to start with oldest and go to newest. And I'm going to jump over some of the coasters. Unless, well, Joris and the Draken Bear in 1898 are the 2 big ones, so we'll just go in order here. We'll just go right in chronological order here. Fairy Tale Forest, 1952, we talked about that. That's got all of your classics, right? You can actually climb up to the top of the Rapunzel castle in there too, up the side of the hill, which was pretty cool. We did get to do that. Going down, they have a beautiful indoor carousel. The Stoom carousel there, absolutely gorgeous inside the same building that the diorama is, which is a massive display of a model railroad and sort of like a Dutch countryside with railroads and towns through all the different seasons. Just an absolutely massive display indoors in the middle of the park, and the carousel is in that same building. The Haunted Castle, which is known as Spookslot in Dutch, is sort of I described it to you the other day. If you remember the old Twister attraction at Universal Studios, Florida, where you sort of stood on the different tiers and then you watched the show, it was similar to that, but it was like a castle graveyard and there was Pepper's Ghost effect. So wasn't overly outstanding, but kind of cool. So now we'll start to get into some of the big ones, right? So Python is their Vekoma looping coaster, which was one of the very first Vekoma roller coasters. The understanding we were given is the Dutch take a tremendous amount of pride in this roller coaster because it's one of the very first Vekoma creations. Vekoma is very, very close. The headquarters in Vlodrop are very, very close to Efteling. And that's why so many of the rides at this park are built by Vekoma. And if anything, this park is a glowing testimonial of the work Vekoma can do. And maybe they haven't been given the right opportunities since they've sort of started to do higher quality stuff over here in the States yet. But they are doing a lot of what a lot of people consider to be higher quality stuff in Europe. And I think that Efteling is a very good example of what they can do.
You know, at some point, Vekoma, like the only things people know here that Vekoma does are boomerangs and SLCs.
Right.
And those are not that interesting. Obviously, you know, they haven't, and maybe that's their own fault too, is that, you know, they were selling these things, you know, all over the place, and people were buying them all over the place, and why someone said, hey, this is an SLC and this is something I think every park should have. Whoever came up with that thought should probably, I don't want to get real nasty here, but probably not be living anymore, because it just doesn't, it boggles the mind. And I guess since then, Vekoma, you know, there's a few custom layouts here and there that follow the same arrow method, but then after that, not a whole lot heard from Vekoma, and now you're finally seeing this renaissance of Vekoma with things like the Top Gun model and all this stuff you see over like in Europe with Energylandia and all these new Vekomas popping up in Asia. That Vekoma seems to be doing some pretty high quality stuff now, and people, it's almost like Vekoma's become, you know, the running joke amongst coaster groups. And I don't think that's a fair assessment anymore, maybe for the last.
No, certainly not anymore.
Yeah, at some point, yes. At some point, yes. I think they deserved what they got for having, peddled the SLC as much as one could. And I think that's even to some extent, boomerangs are okay rides. They're not like, it's not like they're like terrible rides. The SLC most of the time, like you said on previous shows, can produce some pretty terrible experiences. But now I think now Vecoma's finally coming out of that. And is finally doing some pretty cool stuff out there where if someone said to me, oh yeah, this park in America was going to get a Vekoma roller coaster, I'd probably be pretty excited for it and maybe even think it might be high up on the anticipated list for that year.
No, definitely. I think everything you say there is spot on. And so Python they want to actually just replace last year. They completely rebuilt it with all new track, a lot of new support designs actually as well. It's essentially a brand new roller coaster, but it's very simple, double loop, double corkscrew with a helix. And nothing overly special in terms of layout, but butter smooth and very forceful. We very much enjoyed this ride, and that is not something I can say about a lot of Vekoma looping coasters, but this one was certainly one that we enjoyed quite a bit. The gondoletta we did not ride, but that is the towboat ride that goes around the lake that is in the middle of the park, including one of the Symbolica castle, which is sort of on the one end of the lake. We're going to go down to 1984, which is when Carnival Festival, which to me was maybe one of the surprise dark rides. The best way that I can describe this, so it was actually built by Mock Rides, and it's an original ride. There's no IPs or anything aside from the fairy tale type things, but it is very much in the style of It's a Small World from Disney, where you go through the different countries. And if you're really following along on Wikipedia, and this ride and many of the others at Efteling actually have their own pages, and it goes through several different countries: the Netherlands, Belgium, Monaco, France, the UK, Germany, the Alps, Italy, Japan, China. The Arctic is what they call it. It was really like a Siberia or Antarctica winter area, Africa, and then Mexico and Hawaii finally. Now, I will say this. This ride just recently went under a renovation to supposedly make it less racist. Okay, so, and I don't know a better way to phrase this. So, and riding this ride really makes me wonder what it used to do, because it's still extremely racist. So we talked about at Bobby Jean Land, you have the El Paso Special where you're going through the Texas saloon shooting the Mexicans, right? This is a little bit different. So if you look at some of the photos here, all the characters and all the figurines are like, they're almost like the Russian dolls, where they have like the cone-shaped bodies, and then they're rounded off at the bottom, and they've got like dowel rods for arms, and they've got like just wooden balls for heads with the big red nose, and they've got like the eyes and mouths that are just stickers, right? Here's some of the things that stuck out. So, you go through the Netherlands and, they're fishing, and you see, some typical Dutch, because, the ride's in the Netherlands, the park's in the Netherlands. So that one's very conservative. And then you go through Belgium and France, and they have like painters, and they all have the mustaches and whatnot. Then you go through the UK, and their teeth are like they're missing teeth and whatnot on the little figures. Germany, Italy, they're, eating pasta and pizza and, very Italian and whatnot. Then you get to China. And so you get to China. So first of all, you go through Japan first, and there's sumo wrestling. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Then you get to China, and the China area, you enter the China scene, and it's the dragon, like the Chinese dragon that you see in the parades, right? So it's the Chinese dragon. But then just beyond the Chinese dragon is what I originally thought was the on-ride photo. No, it's figurines that have cameras wrapped around their neck taking pictures.
Well, yeah, that's a little. Well, I'm reading right now of what they removed.
Oh, are you looking this up?
Yeah, so apparently the African figures had a lot of nose rings. And
Okay, yes, I do remember hearing about that. Yes, there was not that around, and they're doing a lot of drums, and obviously they're black.
And then the Asian dolls will be given more natural eyes and teeth, as opposed to, I'm assuming.
And
very
those still weren't perfect because the eyes on the Japanese and Chinese figures were noticeably different from the others, but they were maybe less extreme. But there was definitely a difference on the eye stickers when you got to Japan and China. So that wasn't fully removed. But the camera thing was the big thing that stuck out to us in that area.
And they also did not remove the cannibal. That there's to update the Monsieur Cannibal attraction. This might be a separate ride, in which visitors sit in a cooking pot presided over by a so-called cannibal in stereotypical garb. So that's a different ride, I think.
Yeah, that's a different ride.
Yeah.
But yes, if you're on the Festival Carnival or Carnival Festival, I keep reversing to it's Carnival Festival. If you're on that page, you can see a picture of Paris. You can see a picture of Jokey the Union Jack, or Jokey with Union Jack, which is like the jester guy flying the British plane. You see the German, the German Bavarian style house there. The Netherlands is very green, right? And then you can see the Iceman, which is sort of like the Arctic area where it's got like all the figurines are frozen and they're covered in snow, and there's like snowman and penguins. And then the last one is a picture of Africa where you can see like the figures. They've got like the African, the very decorative and tribal type headgear, and they all have really big lips as well. Like the lips are way bigger than the other figurines. Like it's just all these different, and they're like little details like this that it's just they sort of add up over the course of the entire ride.
Yeah.
And then at the end, when you go through Mexico, they have donkeys that are like pulling carts with like the Mexican figures in it, and they're wearing sombreros and they're shaking maracas and stuff like that, like a mariachi band. And then finally, at the end, you go through Hawaii, and what are the Hawaiian figures wearing? They're wearing the grass hula skirts, and they're all dancing.
Level, like you wonder, like there's a line between, and this is that cultural line that is somewhat difficult to navigate. There's a line between portraying cultural heritage and costumes. Like you think of A Small World, it does that. But then there's a line of then portraying stereotypes, like you saw in the one where you're shooting Mexicans in the saloon. Like there's a line there of one is probably okay and one is probably not okay. And sometimes when you get closer to that line, it becomes harder and more difficult. And for instance, just think of the controversy surrounding how they've changed Pirates of the Caribbean over the years. Where just concepts of feminism and what it means, how women should be portrayed, where they took away the woman in red and the pirates were chasing her around and trying to, in theory, rape and pillage her. And Disney kind of like tried to get rid of that, and you saw the outrage. And it seems here is the same thing. When Efteling changed this ride, there was a bit of a backlash to that as well. But at some point, you can't keep portraying the same stereotypes over and over and keeping the laugh at them. It's just at some point it becomes wrong. And once you cross that line, and maybe that line changes over time too. That in society we've seen that line constantly moved, and then there's it's an ever moving target, and I think the ride that we talked about at Bobby John Land with the shooting of the Mexicans in the El Paso special, that certainly is over the line, or at least what we in the United States would consider over the line. And over in Belgium, in French-speaking Belgium, I don't know what's over the line and what's not. Knows what the line is there.
I won't claim to know what the line is over there either. This seems
apparently in Europe, exposed breasts is not over the line. So I'm all for
and
that.
I am completely in favor of that not being over the line. I mean, very clearly. But I mean, this ride to me, going through it, it was kind of those more it wasn't as in your face as, hey, we're going to go into a saloon and shoot a bunch of Mexicans. Like, it wasn't that obvious. And we're not trying to we're not turning this into a political or a cultural debate here. This is just what the park and what the ride is. This to me was sort of a subtle but noticeable type thing that's like maybe right in that gray area that may be over the line at some point and may not be. Like, okay, the cameras, like, we go over there and we see that, and it's like, oh my God, that's hilarious. All the Chinese people are taking pictures, like, because that's something we see over here. And it's just a stereotype that the ride portrays. And if that's over the line for you, then okay, it's over the line. But for them, that's what's in their ride.
And they spent 3 million euros renovating the ride. So
it's a very popular ride, and the ride it's one of those rides, like, it's not a thrill ride, right? It's just like your Omni Mover type dark ride, scenic ride. But this ride is just so much fun to go through, and it's got its own tune that it's playing in all the different themed fanfares and everything. The other thing that I noticed here, and I didn't know this, but I just read this here, it says, since 2019, since the refurbishment, if a disabled person boards the attraction, a fanfare will play.
No.
I don't understand why that is. I don't know if that's to alert the operators or if that's like, I don't know what that is, but it makes it sound like it's like, it makes it sound like it's a big deal.
Who knows with your
but these are the type of things that make, again, that's just one of the things that makes Efteling stick out. And so Carnival Festival, in my opinion, only the third or maybe fourth best dark ride in the park. And you heard about how much I enjoyed that, right? So let's keep moving on. We'll go down to Fata Morgana.
Hold on, I have a question here because I see something. Maybe you didn't write this, but the Wikipedia page says Polka Marina is a combination carousel and mini roller coaster. Is that the area?
No, so if you click on that ride page and go to the ride page, you'll see it's one of those Sea Storm rides. You remember I described the Christopher Columbus Sea Storm ride at the indoor Sea Storm ride at Europa Park? This is that same type of ride.
So this is Wikipedia just being a mischaracterization. It's really not a roller coaster.
The combination of a carousel and a mini roller coaster because it goes up and down like a Music Express as it goes around. That's just the Wikipedia description of what the ride is. It is not a roller coaster. Okay. But we did see that. We did not ride it. That's at the very back of the park, and it's themed to Moby Dick, which is why the big white whale's in the middle of it. So there you go. That's out in the back of the park. So we're going to go to Fata Morgana, which is 1986. And this is really sort of the Arabian Nights version of Pirates of the Caribbean. It's your boat style dark ride. This is their water dark ride. And instead of pirates, it's Arabian Nights or 1001 Arabian Nights. And if you look at pictures and go to the Wikipedia, I love that Wikipedia has pages for all of these rides because we can talk about them in such great detail. But according to this, it's populated by 140 animatronics, which is a lot. That's a lot of animatronics, especially for a ride this old. And they're very good animatronics for the most part, especially for 1986. And you go through all these different scenes, a very long ride, some very, very beautiful scenes as well. Some beautiful scenes throughout this entire ride, including the most notable of which is probably the throne room, which is where sort of like the king is sitting. There's lots of gold and regal colors like your reds and your oranges and yellows. That you have your king sitting on the throne and he's being fanned by the animatronics and sort of his posse, if you will, in the throne room with his treasure. So many or harem, I think is the word that they use here. So there's the treasure chamber. There's a torture chamber area as well. So you do all different things. And you go through all these different areas. There's even belly dancers, Andy. So you get a little bit of that on this ride as well. But it's an 8-minute ride. So again, very, very extensive in the theming, very, very immersive, and a very enjoyable ride experience. Again, not from a thrill standpoint, but from an experiential standpoint. This is the highlight and us do for anyone who's visiting Efteling. And again, if you look at the picture of the building, the ride is massive. It has very Arabian Mahal feel to it. If you look at the photos, especially at night, the way that this building is lit up at night is very, very beautiful. And it's right on the water there. That's actually visible from quite a ways away. The one lake that it's on, you can see it from across the lake, and it's very, very, very pretty. A very pretty building to look at as well. Shall we continue to move on through the attractions here? So the Pagoda is their flying island observation tower. Almost nobody's left.
I said to you the minute I saw that, I'm like, you know what? This looks like something that just shouldn't work.
Yep.
It doesn't look right.
No, you're exactly right. It is an intimate flying island. Does Legoland still have theirs?
Florida?
Yeah, because Sue went and rode this one because she had not been on the one at Legoland Florida. I did not ride this one in particular because I wanted to go re-ride a few of the other rides, but I had been on the one at Legoland Florida, so I can say that I had been on one. Island in the Sky closed in 2017.
Yeah.
So yes, so it's one. It may be. Oh, I'm trying to think if there's another one. I don't.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I can't think of any others in the.
There's certainly none in the States. There might be one somewhere else in Europe. But so imagine instead of your observation tower that is just a tower that you go up and down, the observation tower is on the end of a big arm, and the arm pivots upwards like this until it's nearly vertical, and it rotates. And it looks like the island is floating in the sky. Very, very cool to watch, and gives a great view of the park. Moving down to 1993, which for me is one of the two attractions at the park in terms of the dark rides. And some people go back and forth. If you like the new technology style dark ride, Symbolica might be your favorite, which is the 2017 ride. If you like the more classic style dark ride and the older style dark rides, Droomvlucht is by far the runaway hit of this park. And Droomvlucht is arguably the icon of Efteling. Built in 1993, the Droomvlucht, the translation there is Dream Flight. There's not too much translation needed there. Now, again, I'm just comparing a lot of these attractions to Disney attractions because I think it started with Europa Park. Now, the Europa Park attractions, you could tell in the park were inspired by those attractions because they had similar themes. These rides, I'm using them more to describe the ride system, and then it's sort of the comparisons sort of end there. So the ride system for Droomvlucht is essentially your Peter Pan's Flight ride system, where it's a suspended dark ride attraction, or like an ET where you're in a suspended vehicle, but all the comparisons end there. This ride is absolutely stunningly beautiful from beginning to end. It's about a 6 or 7 minute ride, and it takes you through all the different fairy tale lands and fairy tale gardens where the fairies reside. To do a castle room, it takes you into like the fairy tale gardens. It takes you, they call it the wondrous forest, the fairy garden, the squelch forest. I'm reading some of the names of the proper names of the areas and the rooms here. For me, there is a part of this ride, and I think it's in the squat area, actually downward spiral where you actually pick up some speed. And there was some question as to whether or not this ride would count as a roller coaster at that point, because it's actually going downwards in a spiral and you're going at a pretty good pace. Now you're attached to the power source the entire time. If the ride were to e-stop, you would stop eventually along that area. So, we're not going to get into that debate here, but it's this circular room of the forest area, and you're just going around the forest the entire time. And this room has to be like 50 or 60 feet tall, and there's fairies flying across, and there's people swinging on vines, and there's animals and creatures, everything is going on. So you're circling the same circle multiple times, 4 or 5 times. And every time you go around, you see something different because you're gradually going down. And there's different things happening on top of one another that you don't see at the bottom when you're at the top. And when you get to the bottom, you see new things and you can't see what was at the top anymore. It's just a brilliant effect and a brilliant use of space to let you see all these different things in one area. It's really, really something the way they do it. So that was 13 meters down into a rainforest. Here. So that's roughly, meters, roughly 3 feet. So it's about 40 feet, I guess. So I wasn't too far off in my guess. The other big scene for me is what they call the Heavenly Strongholds. So what this is a giant cavern-looking room, but it's supposed to be a starry night, and starry night, stars twinkling, and you see moons, and you then see all these different castles floating in the night sky, and they're floating amongst one another, and they call them strongholds here, but they're these crystal-looking castle structures. I don't even know how I would describe them. It's almost like if you took like the Fortress of Solitude look with like the ice beams and then made it into an actual castle that looked like that. And they're lit up in these beautiful colors of reds and purples and oranges and blues. And they're floating amongst this starry night sky. And it's just a wonderful effect. And I was very, very glad that you go through that area slowly. Because you get to spend a lot of time looking at that scene, which was just wonderful. And again, I'm not going through each of the scenes here, but even the very beginning of the ride has an honest-to-goodness waterfall and honest-to-goodness plants, and you get even the scent of plants and foliage and vegetation in there. It's just, this is an awe-inspiring ride, and in terms of a classic dark ride, this has to be one of, if not the best in the world. It's that good. This isn't just because it's in Europe. This is how good that ride is. Droomvlucht, in my opinion, is one of the world-class dark rides of the world.
Well, it looks like it's really interesting from what it does, especially if it has that spiral drop in it that gives you a little, different. Because, one of the things with the Disney rides is that they're all pretty much the same and there's no real surprises on them, in quotation marks. So to have something like that on there where you're in a semi-free fall, seems like it changes it up a little bit. It seems a little different.
Yeah, for sure. This was a wonderful, wonderful attraction. I can't say enough good things about this. And if you know that I like to go on and on about Voyage, and there's certain rides that I'll just talk forever about. If you want to get Adam Beard to talk forever about an attraction, ask him about Droomvlucht, because this is one of his absolute favorite rides ever. And it's one of mine too. But this, for me, Droomvlucht and Symbolica, for me, it's a toss-up. Give me either. They're so different because Symbolica is all the new technology, and Droomvlucht is just so awe-inspiring just from the scenes you go through. Droomvlucht is probably, Symbolica is the more technologically advanced and more technologically impressive ride to me. But Droomvlucht to me, in terms of a ride experience, is the much more immersive and spectacular experience. So, next time you meet him at a park, ask him about Droomvlucht, and he will tell you even more about that. Moving on, they actually consider the House of the Five Senses as its own attraction here, and I said it was roughly 150 feet, 171 feet, according to Wikipedia. So you're talking pretty much the size of Gatekeeper is how big this building is. And there is a story behind it, but we won't go into that, but there is a story behind why it's called the House of Five Senses. And it has the world's largest reed roof. So the roof is actually made out of reeds. I said shingles earlier, but they're actually reeds. So according to the Guinness Book of World Records, it has the largest wooden reed roof, which is pretty cool. So all those special things going on there. Via Volta is their Vekoma madhouse, which is one of the very early Vekoma madhouses. The most impressive thing here, 3 pre-shows. 3 pre-shows, and none of them were in English, if I remember correctly. So there's 3 pre-shows, and it's supposed to be a mansion that's been taken over, right? And not haunted mansion in the Disney sense. It looks like an house, and it's haunted. And Via Volta is the name of it, and it's sort of it's supposed to be, there's this terrorist group, I think, that's kind of going through and robbing the houses, and the Via Volta is supposed to be like a house that's haunted from that. Nowhere in your house nor anywhere else in place in the world will you find peace. Only when a noble man with a clear conscience like that of a newborn child enters your house will be peace in your home and in your heart. So overall, it's like a 10-minute experience to go through these pre-shows and then do the ride itself, maybe even longer. But very, very cool. Your typical Vekoma madhouse where it swings back and forth and then the drum spins around you to make the illusion of going upside down. Very, very fun ride. And even though we went into it knowing what to expect as far as ride experience goes, a very, very cool story and definitely a fun ride. Bird Rock or Vogel Rock is the translation there, is their indoor roller coaster, a very long indoor roller coaster. Music, lighting effects, supposedly, according to Adam, not all of them were working when we rode it. He said he remembered there being a few more lights and whatnot. It does take place in complete darkness with the exception of some lighting effects, and there is a big bird. At one point, if you click on the page of this, you'll see that the entrance is just a huge eagle, like condor-style bird that you walk underneath, and the head is going back and forth, and you walk underneath it, and you go into the building. There is a big statue of that bird in the building that lights up that you go around a few times, and there's like hawk and condor screeches and whatnot. So that's sort of the theme that you're going for here. It's according to Wikipedia, again, and I'm referencing it a lot here, but it refers to the adventure of Sinbad and the Bird Rock from the 1001 Arabian Nights. So that's again, that theme is sort of continued into another attraction here. Very, very much enjoyed Vogel Rock. We're going to move down to Die Vliegende Hollander, which translates to the Flying Dutchman. And, when you were going through the roller coasters on RCDB, this is when you sort of skipped over. This is one of their signature attractions and one of their best attractions. And it is actually the ride that I finished our day at Efteling on. I went over and rode Joris and the drop on. 5 minutes left when I got off of my front row ride on Joris and the Drac. And I found a few of our friends, and we jumped into line for the Flying Dutchman one last time. So here's what you sort of get out of this ride. And if you look at the pictures, it's this huge building it seems like it would be at like right at port, and the ride is right on the lake. And I would encourage you to go and find some pictures of the station of this ride, because the station is brilliantly lit. So it looks like you're in a river loading into the boats in almost like a Venice type canal that's in between two rows of houses, and it's in a starry night. So it starts off in the boat like a dark ride, and you go into like a Pirates of the Caribbean style beginning where you see the pirates and they're getting ready to set sail, and they're loading cargo into the boats, and it's getting dark, and you hear thunder, and it's dark, and the fog is starting to roll in, right? And then all of a sudden a door opens, and you are just completely engulfed in fog. And if you're sitting in the front row of the boat, you can't see the water off to the side of the boat if you're sitting on the edge. That's how much fog there is. And all you have is the little lantern that's hanging on the front of the boat. That's the only light you have. And everything else is foggy and dark. And you can hear the thunder, and you can hear the storm rolling in. Big boat. And what is it? It's a big fog screen with the same projection effect that you have on Forbidden Journey of like the Dementors sucking your skull out. It's that same sort of thing, but it's the Flying Dutchman coming at you, the ship, the Flying Dutchman coming at you. And it's thunder, and then all of a sudden it goes dark again, and then what lights up in front of you? The mouth of the Flying Dutchman ship, and you start going up into the Flying Dutchman, and that is the lift hill that is sort of the castle tower of this ride. And then at the very top, you go down, you go into the roller coaster part, which has a dropping turn into a fog-filled tunnel. You do an airtime hill, an overbank turn. You come up into a sort of a brake run that's covered very much like Verbolten. Then you do another drop, and you do a little bit of a speed airtime hill, and then you do your final splashdown in the lake in the middle of the ride. And there's no log flume trough here. You're still attached to the coaster track the entire time, and it's completely submerged. So if you're on the outside of the park, just walking around the park, and you look in the lake, you see these Flying Dutchman boats just going around the lake as if they're just boats out there being rowed about in the lake, and they're attached to the track, and the chain is just pulling you along all the way, and eventually you go back into the building and you go back into the station, and that's how the ride ends. But it's supposed to be the journey of the Flying Dutchman, setting out to sea on an eerie, foggy night, being captured by the Flying Dutchman, and then eventually escaping. That's the story they're telling here. Just an incredibly unique experience, unlike anything else. A very, very strong combination of dark ride, boat ride, roller coaster here. It's a thrilling roller coaster. It's an exciting dark ride, and it's a boat ride. And you've got a scenic ride, because when you splash down the lake, you've got Joris and the Drock off to your right. You've got Python right in front of you, and you've got the entire Flying Dutchman building for the dark ride and waiting queue portion off to your left. And you go around the lake there. So an excellent attraction. Certainly one of the highlights there. We're getting down to the very last few here, and you can probably hear it in my voice, just how excited I am talking about all of these. George and the Dragon, which I mentioned a little bit before. This is their GCI racing dueling wood coaster. And this is a ride that I had at number 4 on my most anticipated wood list. And I am happy to say that it comes in at number 3. Now, there are 2 coasters here, and just a very close third to both Troy and Wodan Timber Coaster. These rides aren't as big as Troy and Wodan Timber Coaster, and is a little bit shorter. But certainly no lack of thrills here. Only 72 feet tall, and 2,500 feet long. for these 2 tracks. Here's the best way that I can describe this ride. So you go up, the lift hills are sort of apart, and instead of doing the drop right off the lift hill like a lot of the GCIs do, you actually drop off and you do sort of like an S-bend and then a 180-degree turn so that you line up with the other train, and then you go down the drop. So you go down the drop together. And then you do very standard, you do a couple of airtime hills, you have a double up, just a couple of airtime hills, very much like the out portion of a White Lightning at Fun Spot America in Orlando. So the part of this ride is lightning. Some small speed hills, good airtime, some good ejector and floater airtime, and you're side by side with the other train. Water and Ver or Fire are the names of the 2 tracks. And you do a up, and at that point, it's like, oh, this is pretty good. And then both trains make a diving right-hand turn, and at that point, all hell breaks loose and for a little bit. So you drop off to the side, you go back up, and you crest a hill next to each other, and the one track has a slight kink to the right and does a double down, and the other track has a dive that goes underneath the double down. And then at that point, you're deal where you're doing speed hills and quick turns, and you're jumping over one another and side by side, and then you break apart and you're jumping and doing these speed hills over the lake, and then you hit a turn that has almost no banking, and the 2 trains, very similar to what they do at the beginning of the ride, they make 180-degree turns over the water, and they line back up again for the finale. So the first act is maybe White Lightning, and then the second act is maybe like a Mystic Timbers Prowler type ride. Then the ending of the ride is a little bit more tame, actually. So what you actually do, you do a little bunny hop here and there, and then you line up and you do like a straight bit where the 2 trains are side by side and they're just going straight for a little bit. And then there's like a slight left or a slight right-hand turn. You do like another bunny hop. Both of the tracks have like the sort of like the outside bank off camber little airtime hill, and then they both hit a left-hand turn and into the brake run side by side. I don't think there's another ride. I don't think there is a ride on this earth that is as thrilling as this ride for 72 feet tall. I mean, in turn, this ride has as many thrills and as much excitement as you could pack into a 72-foot tall, 2,500-foot long, 47-mile-per-hour roller coaster as you could possibly do, and in the way that GCI does. When I can describe this ride as a mix between White Lightning, Mystic Timbers, and Lightning Racer, take the best things about each of those rides and kind of put them along with one another, and that's what you've got with this ride. This for me, again, I don't think I rode a top 10 caliber wood coaster on this trip, but Joris and the Drac for me is, a top 20-ish wood coaster, which I think is very, very good when you consider the size and stature of it, and the fact that I tend to be one that likes my rides to be a little bit longer. But this is a shorter ride, but I felt like this ride was the correct length, because had it gone on much longer, I felt like it would have been a lot of the meandering. I think that's why they have that little flat bit at the end where they line up, because for just 2 or 3 seconds, you're occupied by the fact that you're racing another train, and it distracts from the fact that you're just going along a straight stretch of track that's getting you back to the so the racing is very good in that sense. If you were just on a ride by itself that did that, you would kind of wonder, well, what are we doing here? But the racing aspect makes up for that here. So for me, Joris and the Drac, and there are 2 tracks there, so I counted them as 2 credits. They are different tracks. They race at times, they duel at times, but they are different layouts from one another. And both of them are in my top 25 wood coaster. And I think that they would probably be even higher for you because, for me, Mystic Timbers is a top 10 ride. Prowler is just outside of my top 10. Joris and the Drac doesn't have quite the intensity all the way through as a Mystic Timbers or a Prowler, but it's also not nearly as big as those rides. So it's not quite as long. It's not quite as intense in all those spots. But for pure thrill factor for the size of this ride is as good as it gets for 72 feet tall. Absolutely outstanding. You would absolutely love Joris and the Drac.
Yeah, this is one that, I was looking at pictures as you're talking here, trying to figure out what's going on. I was looking at the park map and all that. And it just looks like it's a lot of fun because, I don't like the huge GCIs to begin with. So when you start talking about like Thunderhead and Gold Striker, those are the GCIs I don't like. I like the smaller GCIs like Mystic Timbers and Prowler and Renegade to some extent. I think Renegade's probably the tallest of those, if I had to guess.
Yeah. And this is an amazing night ride as well. So this is where we spent the decision on Saturday night when we got there was, well, let's knock out some of the coasters on Saturday night because the park was only open to we're going to get the night ride. So we said, let's get a dusk ride on Baron, which we did, and let's get a couple of night rides on Joris and the Drac, and let's find our favorite seat so that when we come back tomorrow, we'll just ride it once or twice, and we'll know where we want to sit. So we did a couple of go-arounds on Joris and the Drac, and again, another big compliment to this. We rode this ride, I think, 4 times, twice on each track on Saturday night, and each time we got off and got back in the 40 minute line and had no problem waiting in that line to ride this ride a couple of times in a row. That's how we spent most of our time. And that's another huge compliment that I can give to this ride. But yeah, I mean, this is one that I think would fall right into your wheelhouse based on what you like.
And that dragon in the middle looks pretty cool too.
And you know what? The dragon is super cool. I can honestly say I never noticed it while I was on the ride because I was so preoccupied, because that is the part of the ride. You go by it because the track literally, both tracks go right by it. Mm-hmm. But I never noticed it on the ride. And Adam and Sue said the same thing because when Sue saw the dragon, I knew the dragon was there. Adam knew the dragon was there. Sue didn't even know there was a dragon until we walked by it on Sunday when we walked in that area of the park to take pictures. She was like, when did they put that dragon there? Like, that wasn't there. And I think it's because that's the most intense part of the ride where you're doing a lot of the Mystic Timbers, Prowler, airtime hills, directional changes, side to side, up and down. And I think you're so preoccupied with the forces and how good the ride is in that middle part. The middle part of the ride is the shining star here. And I think because of that, you don't even notice the dragon. But the dragon is super badass. It breathes out orange fog at night, so it's supposed to be a fire-breathing dragon. And I think sometimes it changes to blue, too. So it's ice and fire, or water and fire, which are the 2 tracks. And the theme in the station is super cool, too. So it's this very medieval, it's like the medieval style station, and the water side has blue banners and blue spotlights on the train. And the fire side has red spotlights and red banners. So there's a banner at the finish line of the ride that pivots one way or the other to display either the water or the banner, depending on which train is the Wiener winner. And then when you come back into the station, each side has their respective banners hidden in the rafters. So on the water side, you've got blue banners and blue spotlights. And on the Ver side, you have red spotlights and red banners. And the train that wins, when it comes back into the station, the banners unfurl, and they unfurl so that they're hanging from the rafters, and they play a fanfare. There's like, and then there's cheering and all that stuff. And then the side that loses, you come back, your banners stay hidden, and the spotlights shine down on you, and you hear boo, boo, and you get booed if you lose. So it's a great experience, even to the brake run and back into the station. It's just a great time. The trains are very decorative as well. They look great. Again, just not a bad thing to say about this ride at all either. And again, I think this is one that would quickly climb your list.
Yeah, like I said, this one seems like one that's really interesting, especially with all the gimmicks going on too, on top of all that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Now, Ravelin is their outdoor stunt, like medieval stunt style show, which was dark the day we were there. But honestly, we may not have had time because there's so much to do here.
And I was going to ask you about that because I was looking at some of the pictures of Ravelin, and it looks like a medieval times type deal. Yeah. But they have like major like robots and stuff, like this big like.
I don't know exactly what it is.
Like just the pictures on Wikipedia, I'm looking at it. Like they have people on horses, they have bird people. They've got this big robot that has like bird heads on it, like almost dinosaur like bird heads on it.
Well, that I think is like the Vogel rock. Or it might be.
No, I'm just talking about what's like. If you go on the Ravelin Wikipedia page, there's like pictures.
Right, I'm looking through it. We didn't get to see the show itself, but we did have our group meal that was included with our entry at the restaurant. That's where you can see the arena. That's inside the arena there. So it was like family style where they brought it out in different courses. They brought out the chickens. I actually got to go catch a chicken for our table, which was fun. Just a really, really fun experience for sure. Moving on to the last two attractions here. Badon Iktenakten B&M dive coaster. In terms of stats, 123 feet tall. Or 98 feet tall with a 123-foot drop. Length is only 1,644 feet. Certainly not overly long, but just really, really blew me away. 2 pre-shows, first and foremost. So there's 2 pre-shows prep you for the ride. And then you ride the ride, and then before you hit the lift hill, the train parks in like a Thunderbird style house area. So the theme of Baron is sort of that, and I'm not going to read through it here, but basically what happened is there's a cave that's been discovered that has gold in it, and they're mining for the gold. But then they've been deposited by these spirits, but the spirits are sort of guarding the gold. So what the first pre-show is sort of the story of how they discovered that the gold was there, and then the transmission sort of gets taken over, and it's really cool. So along the ceiling there are these like portals going to the outside, and they open up, and the projections show these what they're called the wise women, or the white ladies, dames blanches, the white women, or the white ladies. The projections show them coming out of these portholes when they open, and then they're flying around the room, and they're wreaking havoc among the room, and they're singing this creepy song. So then you leave that area, right? Then you go to the second pre-show where you get lined up in your rows, and then the prospector guy, the Baron, is describing to you what you're going to do, and hey, we're going to go down into the mines, and we're going to go get this gold. We're going to go to the caves. We're going to get this gold, and here we go. And then you get into the vehicles, and then you go into like the mine shaft out of the station before you hit the lift hill. And the spirits come in singing the same song. It's like a like this very creepy, almost like metronome style thing. And again, portals are opening and closing, and the white ladies are going in and out, and they're flying around the room, and there's all these things happening. And then you proceed, and as you proceed to the lift hill, they're telling you, don't go, and all that sort of stuff. Then you go up, and the lift hill, if you've seen pictures of Baron, are it's meant to look like this 1800 style mine shaft, this Victorian style mine shaft, and it's got the holding brake here. And this was a fun fact that was brought up to me. And I think subconsciously I always knew this, but never really said it out loud. Baron, the only B&M dive coaster to not have a turn at the top of the lift hill. You go up the lift hill, and then you go right into the drop. Now, there is a little bit of a flat part there, but you've got the holding brake. And the coolest thing here, especially if you're in the front seat, if you're in the front seat and you're on that holding brake, you're looking down into the mine shaft, and you can hear the white ladies singing from the speakers in the mine shaft. And as you drop down and you go through the mine shaft is filled with fog, and you hear the white ladies screaming at you when you go through the mine shaft. And then you come back through, you do your Immelman, you do your 0G roll. There's a helix, another airtime hill, and a final helix. In terms of the roller coaster, it's a fairly standard layout. Really nothing to write home about, but everything else about this ride really makes it a standout experience. And this is kind of what we talked about with the King's Dominion Wing Coaster. If you took Baron 1898 as a roller coaster and just put it at a Cedar Fair or Six Flags Park, it would be a very, very forgettable ride. But put in a couple of pre-shows, tell a very interesting story, tell a cohesive story, and put a lot of theming into it and carry it out throughout the entire ride experience. And it takes a very pedestrian roller coaster and turns it into a special experience. And that goes the same for a lot of these other rides here. I mean, Flying Dutchman, in terms of a roller coaster, isn't anything overly spectacular, but you put all the extra effort into it, and you've got a special experience. And I think that's what we talked about even with Fleur de Démon and a potential wing coaster for King's Dominion. This is the common refrain of the things that we'd like to see, especially with these smaller roller coasters. I think these are the types of things we want to see.
Yeah, and like you said, it's if you put that ride, the ride itself is not the impressive part. It's how you build around it. It seems like the Disney model of things too. Like they like to take like a simple ride and really build this story around it. Same thing with Universal to some extent. With Hagrid, is the ride itself the best part? Is the story the best? Like that kind of stuff. So yeah, I could totally see that with this as well.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of like dive coasters, it's got a little bit more in terms of elements, because you've got a 0G roll, which on those wing coaster trains or not wing coaster trains, the dive coaster trains. And like I said with Croquet the other day, those 6 across trains are very agile and can do a lot tighter maneuvers. The 0G roll is an excellent maneuver in those coaster trains, and Emperor at San Diego, I think, is going to have one of those, if I remember correctly, seeing the renderings. So if you have the 6 across trains, the 0G roll doesn't have to be like a Yukon Striker or a Valraven where it's taken very slowly. You can take it with a little bit of zip and get a lot of float and a lot of force in an element that otherwise, might just kind of be a throwaway element. But it's a short ride, but every foot of this ride does something fun. So in that sense, it certainly is a memorable experience.
Mm-hmm.
So then finally, why don't we finish off here with the really the newest big attraction that has recently gone into Efteling, and that is Symbolica. And if I were to give a 20-second synopsis of Symbolica, we all kind of know what the Penguin ride at at SeaWorld Orlando is, with this trackless ride vehicle, and the very poor reviews that ride gets from theme park fans. Symbolica is an example of everything that technology could do, and it does it flawlessly. So the theme of Symbolica is you're visiting a king, and again, I'm gonna read a little bit here. You're visiting because a lot of this is in Dutch while we're there, so it's hard to comprehend all of it. But you're visiting King Pardolphus, who lives in the Court of Hearts, and the visitors are in there, and there's the king. You're sort of waiting to meet the king, and then this character called Pardos, who's the jester, and he's the Efteling's main mascot. He's got like the weird jestery hat. He appears and he guides visitors through all the hidden parts of the palace. And if you look at the pictures, Symbolica is this huge palace looking like building up on some rock work. It's very, very prominent. And when you walk in through the main entrance of Efteling and you come down the main drag at the very front of the park, at the end of that main drag, so on the right side you have like Bob, and that goes over towards Fata Morgana. So we didn't really talk about Bob because it wasn't on the list of the current attractions because it's been removed. It's to a La Vibora, and it takes place in the woods. And I won't go into much more than that because of it's being removed. It's already been removed in favor of the Max and Moritz ride. So off to the right, you've got Bob and Fata Morgana, and off to the left, you can go towards like Droomvlucht and Ravelin. And then you go down the main drag, and on your left is also the Fairy Tale Forest. At the end of that main drag is Symbolica, very proudly sitting on top of this rockwork. And so you get taken through these hidden parts of the palace. And it's one of these things where you either get assigned or you can pick one of 3 different ride experiences. And I'm not sure what they're all called, but they're red, blue, and green. Green is botanical, so it's like botany and plants and life. Blue, and then red is, I believe, called treasure. And at different parts of the ride, the 3 different colored vehicles split off into different rooms, and you see different themes based on what themed vehicle you're in. Was I in treasure or music? I was on treasure because I was red. I think Adam was in music, and I think Sue also got put in music because we single ridered this because it had a very, very long. So they're called Hero Tour, Hero Tour, Music Tour, and Treasure Tour. Okay, so that's what it is. And there's 3 routes. Each of the 3 routes attend 9 scenes. There's 9 different areas. There's 11 overall, but each vehicle goes through 9 because there's a couple different places where they split off. So you go into all these different scenes, all these different hidden areas of the palace, and there are projections and lasers and animatronics, and there's so many things going on, and it's interactive too. So there's different parts of the ride where when you split off into your different areas, you might be looking at a mirror. At least in ours on Treasure, it was a mirror in like a bedroom or something. We were looking at a mirror that was actually a projection screen. We couldn't tell it was a screen. It looked like a mirror, but it was a projection screen. And there's a touch screen on the middle of the ride vehicle, and you can touch different things on the screen to make different things appear and happen on the mirror, in the mirror that you're looking at, and also in the room around you. So it's interactive in that sense too. So not only do you get a different ride experience from the 3 different vehicles, you also get a different ride experience based on what you touch on the touchscreen to make different things happen around you. So that occurs in the part of the ride where you're splitting off from the other vehicles. And a lot of other times, you're with all the other vehicles. One of my favorite, and there's so many different things, I can't possibly talk about all the different things that happen in this ride. A couple things there's a champagne area where they're popping champagne bottles and the corks are going flying and everything. So that's a lot of fun all around the vehicles. There is an area where the mascot, the jester guy, has a huge like stack of pancakes, and they're like going through. He's walking around with a pancake cart. and it's like getting ready to fall over. But for me, the big finale really for the ride is at the end, which is called the Koningszaal, which is the royal hall, and there's a big party, a big dance party going around. So, and again, if I didn't mention this before, like Antarctica, it's the trackless style dark ride. So the vehicles can follow different paths, and they interact with one another, and they cross each other's paths because they're trackless. So while you're in the royal hall, you have animatronics dancing on the dance floor around you. You have lasers and projections and lights and music and disco balls and all these different special effects going on, all of which is practical effects. You have practical animatronics. You have couples, animatronic couples dancing on the dance floor. You've got single animatronics. You've got different creatures. You've got different things going on. You've got different pieces of scenery doing different things, all moving around on this dance floor and throughout this giant royal palace hall. And in between all of the animatronics, the ride vehicles are dancing and spinning and crossing one another. And you're coming within inches of animatronics and other ride vehicles and interacting with one another. It's just an absolutely spectacular experience. I can't even really, I'm doing a very poor job of describing it, to be quite honest with you. And it was really awe-inspiring in a lot of the same sense that Droomvlucht was. And I'll finish with the same point that I made when I talked about Droomvlucht is, if you want the classic dark ride experience where you're in a vehicle and you just go by apps, you just go through beautiful, pristine, gorgeous looking scenes, Droomvlucht is the ride. If you want the interactive, technological marvel, best of the best, state-of-the-art technology dark ride experience, then Symbolica is the ride that you would probably most prefer. For me, sitting here 4 months later, I still don't know which one I liked better. For me, they're 1A and 1B, and I don't even know which one would be which on a given day. I can tell you Joris and the Drac was my favorite roller coaster at the park, but I'm not so sure that I like Joris and the Drac better than these two dark rides, because these two dark rides are both special experiences. I can't say enough about some of the rides at this park. I can't say enough about this park as a whole. The food was excellent, just from some of the other experiential things that we didn't really talk about. The operations were great. The staff was very friendly. Typically they assign seats on Joris and the Drac, and all the operators that were at Joris and the Drac saw that we were coaster people, and they let us pick where we wanted to sit, because they knew we were from America, because they asked us where we were from, because we're all wearing like a lot of American coaster shirts. But and some of them were coaster people, and they're like, oh yeah, wait for the front. You should wait for the front. That's the best seat. We'll let you wait for the front. And they were fun. They were interactive. I can't think of a single thing about Efteling that I didn't like. And I didn't even talk about the hotel, but the Efteling hotel right off site was beautiful. The breakfast was outstanding that they had. The spread was amazing. The hotel rooms were even themed to like the fairy tales. Every single little every hotel room had a little cutout in the baseboard in between the two beds underneath the nightstand, and there was a little resin statue of a fairy tale mouse from one of the fairy tales sticking his head up looking at you through the mouse hole in the baseboard. Every single hotel room had that. And it's just little touches like that. And when you checked out of the hotel, they would say, would you like to mail a postcard from the park for free? And you could mail an Efteling postcard anywhere in the world for free, and the hotel would send it to you. So what did we do? We sent all of our friends and family at home an Efteling postcard.
It's funny, Danny, I didn't receive one.
No, you didn't receive one. I said friends and family.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. But And we spent both Saturday night and Sunday night, spent some time in the bar at the bottom of the hotel. They had an excellent selection of alcoholic beverages. We sampled quite a bit of those. Efteling actually had a few beers and brews and drinks that are specifically made for the Efteling Hotel, and you cannot get anywhere else. So that was really, really cool too. You can tell by the fact that I've been talking about this place for an hour and a half now, just how much I enjoyed my time there and how spectacular it was. And I'm sure Andy's like, oh my God, we need to end this thing like 45 minutes ago. But I'm sure he's bought 3 wrestling belts and 5 action figures on eBay throughout this entire.
Yeah, this show's cost me quite a bit of money here, Danny. So.
Yeah, I know it has. I noticed that there's more and more stuff on that shelf behind you every time we do.
Well, that's what happens when I sit here and listen to European shows. I get more items.
You get more and more items. No, but it's. I know that, and maybe some people haven't enjoyed listening to me talk hours and hours and hours about these European parks. And if you don't, that's fine. I know a lot of people who have been sending in, or at least some people who've been sending in their Thrilling 32 ballots have commented on, even though they don't know these parks and they don't know these rides, they're really enjoying hearing about them, and it's making them get excited about potentially making a trip themselves one day to some of these places. And I would say that if you are going to do a trip to mainland Europe, everyone will tell you about Disneyland. Everyone will tell you about Europa Park. Everyone will tell you about Phantasialand. Those are the ones that we know and have heard about for years and years and years. I think Efteling in Coatesville in the Netherlands is one of, if not the best theme park experience in the world. It's certainly one of the best overall theme park experiences in the world. And again, like I said, I enjoyed my time at Efteling even more than I enjoyed our time at Phantasialand and Europa Park and Wallaby. And I enjoyed the absolute hell out of all of those parks that I just mentioned. And I enjoyed, every visit on this trip.
Sweeping 2 weeks over the whole countryside or whatever. But you could realistically make a pretty interesting trip by just hitting the Netherlands. With Efteling and Wallaby, and if you go expand just slightly outside, you got Phantasialand and Movie Park right there. Yep. You could make a really interesting, and then if you got,
that's a good shorter trip, just those 4 or 5 parks right there.
Yeah, and honestly, you could make something there, and you lose your Europas, you lose maybe Expedition G-Force if you did that, and Haida Park.
Well, and Europa, Tripsdrill, and Holiday Park are fairly close to each other, closer to the south, and Europa Park is very close to the French border. So if you actually do a trip where you do some French parks, that's maybe the better opportunity to do a Europa Park. So if you're talking about maybe you only have a week and you want to do some of those northern parks, then, Movie Park, Phantasialand, certainly at least a day and a half at Efteling, maybe 2, just to get everything in and do your re-rides, because it is a big park. It does take some time to walk from ride to ride to ride. And then also Wallaby Holland. I mean, that right there, those 4 or 5 parks right there would be a very solid week-long trip.
Yeah. So, just looking at it from that perspective, and just the way you talk about things, and it kind of gives me an idea of what things I like, what things I would like to do. And honestly, Europa Park, not high on my list anymore. But Efteling sounds like a place that I would probably enjoy a lot based on everything that's there, even though the coaster collection may not be, out of this world amazing. The other stuff kind of makes up for it, I think. And then
it's the same thing. It's the same thing with your Europa Park in a sense. Like, the coaster collection is not nearly one of the best in the world, but it doesn't have to be, because you don't go to Europa Park for the roller coasters. You don't go for one specific thing. You go to Europa Park to go to Europa Park. Efteling is the same way. You don't go to Efteling for the roller coasters. You don't go for one specific ride. You go to Efteling for the entire package, and it is an excellent overall package. But sorry, continue your thoughts there.
Yeah, so like I'm just looking at things on what I would do and how I would travel this area of the world. It's nice to do the grand sweeping trips, but also with the grand sweeping trips, you do run into the possibility of missing out on a lot because you have stuff planned out every single day and you're moving, and there's no room for wiggle room in there too. So sometimes
You're never going to get it all on a big trip like this.
Yeah. It depends on you. You have to be able to have flexibility, and you have to be able to add in spare days that you don't have anything planned on. If you have something planned every single day, then yeah, you're going to miss out on something. If you have spare days and you don't pre-book everything, for example, when I traveled Pennsylvania, we didn't pre-book anything. We would book the hotel the night before, and you travel through wherever you go. You do what you have to do, and we actually ended up having more time on that trip a few years back, where we said, let's extend this. We had no intention of going up to Six Flags New England, and we decided to do that anyway. And we said, well, let's extend this a little bit and hit New England and maybe hit some other stuff along the route, because we had extra time. Because we planned on Six Flags Great Adventure taking 2 days, and Danny, it took us half a day to get through, through record time going through that park, unprecedented in the history of roller coaster parks, of trying to get through Great Adventure in half a day. And we were able to do that. So instead of having 2 days pre-booked where we'd have to go back and spend a whole nother day there, we were able to move on and do something else. So having that flexibility, by traveling, I think, with yourself, as opposed to with a large tour group, there's pluses and minuses to both sides of that. Sure. Traveling with the big tour group, you don't have to worry about the booking and the pre-planning and all that crap, and where you're going to go and how you're going to get there and where you're going to sleep. So there's pluses and minuses to all of that, but it's interesting, to see different routes of what people would take there.
No, it is, for sure. And one other thing that I actually also remembered about Symbolica, the other big one, you go into like the botanical garden area, and then it looks like a greenhouse wall, but it's actually a tank of water, and there's a big whale in it. And then the glass cracks, and the water actually starts spewing out like it's ready to crack, and it starts filling the floor with water, like the tank that the whale's in is going to explode. It's a super cool effect. That's the other big, that's at the beginning of the ride. That's why I didn't initially think of that one. But I was scrolling through the rest of it, and I did recall that one there. But yeah, I mean, when you're looking at planning these trips and you're looking at geographically what makes sense, certainly you want to spend at least a day and a half at a park like Efteling, just so you can do everything once and maybe get a couple of repeats on your favorites. Mm-hmm. There's not a cut the line system. There is single rider on virtually everything. So that's nice. We did utilize that quite a bit to get more rides in. But boy, I can't say enough good things about it. Certainly should be a focal point of any Europe trip. And if you want the big coasters, Walibi Holland isn't too far away. So if you want your roller coaster park, you go to Walibi. And if you want overall well-rounded experience, you can go to Efteling. And the people in the Netherlands in general are so friendly. They were very, very accommodating. We had so many wonderful experiences with Dutch folks. I would actually say that I really enjoyed our time in the Netherlands better than I enjoyed a lot of our time in Germany, just in general, not even talking about the theme parks in general. The Netherlands in many ways was the highlight, were where many of the highlights of the entire trip were. I don't know I don't know what you take away from that, but there's a saying that if you ain't Dutch, you ain't much. So maybe there's something to that, man.
Yeah.
On our 20-minute flight on KLM, the Royal Dutch Airlines, when we flew from Amsterdam to Hamburg, a 20-minute flight, they gave us a cheese sandwich and a Heineken on a 20-minute flight for free. It was included with the like $70 ticket.
Oh, that's
Oh, you can't beat that, man.
cheese sandwiches.
Oh man, take me back to the Netherlands, man. I love it.
Well,
now I did not partake for work-related reasons, but and I won't name names, but if you want, you could take an Uber or something into Amsterdam, and you could get a space brownie or a space cookie, and you can indulge in that in the morning, and then maybe be as high as some of those floating castles in Droomvlucht. There,
I got news for you, Danny Miller. It's January 1st. I can travel down anywhere in the state of Illinois. I can go to my local dispensary. So there's no reason to travel to Amsterdam for that anymore.
Well, no, but you might feel like floating just as much as some of those things in Droomvlucht there when you're riding the ride there at Efteling. You can be higher than a kite in Coacheville.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us here on Danny Miller's
Happy New Year
adventures through Germany and the Netherlands and Europe in general. We have a whole bunch of other stuff planned coming up. Obviously, the voting for the Thrilling 32 has officially closed. So we are, absolutely calculating what is going on there and trying to figure out, some winners. So the selection show will be coming up very, very soon. And with that, you'll be able to participate in the 2020 Thrilling 32 Bracket Challenge, which is always one of the highlights of the year for everyone.
Yes. And just, voting's closed. But I can safely say that I will not be running the calculation on New Year's Day because I will be visiting my family. So if you're watching this on January 1st or maybe even January 2nd and you haven't voted yet, maybe you could still probably slide it in there. But if you're watching the show and it's the year 2020, don't wait any longer because I will be running that calculation in the next day or two. So, but yes, voting has closed. So we thank everyone for that as well. But, Andy, we've got something else that's coming up, too, not just the Ride Warrior Choice Awards and the Thrilling 32.
I was looking at my calendar, and I forgot that we forgot to do one of the most important things in 2019, and that was to run the Tournament of Terrible. And
that's right.
We've got 32 more terrible things.
Make it 33, an hour and 45-minute show talking about one theme park in the Netherlands.
Shockingly, that's not on the list.
Well, I'm not surprised. This was a great show.
That'll be on next year's list. So, as always, thanks for joining us here. We got a whole bunch of great things coming up for you here in 2020. Big year, new graphics, new colors that are old colors. But we're here.
The old is new again. It's new. We relocated the colors. It's new to you if you joined us after 2017.
So, as always, I'm Andrew Varchek from Chicago, Illinois.
And I'm Danny Miller from Binghamton, New York.
Right on, Ride Warriors.
Thanks for riding along with the Europe train, guys. See you next time.